Okay, are we on?
Hello, hello, hello. Good evening or good morning. Welcome one and all to this webcast of the Cross Current Ministry of IFES, where we will reveal together the results of our research about the life of young Christian professionals. My name is Christel. I'm calling in from Düsseldorf in Germany. I'm part of the Cross Current team, and I am going to host this event together with my colleagues from various places. Welcome to many of you who I'm seeing on Facebook and on YouTube. I see already a lot of comments. Feel free to comment. Use the chat function to add your comments and ask your questions. There will be a time for questions and answers after the presentation. And after the webcast, we will have a time for Zoom Lounge. So you will be invited to a Zoom time, which will be a time for more interactive conversation together. This is a presentation which is brought to you by Cross Current. Cross Current is a ministry of IFES, the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. One specific branch in this ministry is called Graduate Impact and works among young Christian professionals. Since 2012, we've worked among more than 600 of them in small learning communities, small group learning communities, where we seek to learn what it means to integrate faith and work. We want to do that because we believe that is important to flourish as Christians and become ambassadors of Christ. So meet the team. I'm welcoming Samuel from the UK. Hello, Samuel. Adrian Petrice from Romania.
Hey. Good to see
Charlotte
you.
from the UK. Rodica from Moldova.
Hi, everyone.
And last but not least, Tim from the UK.
Hi.
A few words about the ministry. As I told you, Cross Current works in small learning communities. We've got city groups meeting in cities, professional groups meeting around a profession, and proxy groups in various regions of the world, in North America, in Latin America, in Africa. This is a fairly recent development, and we're really pleased about that and very thankful about that. And in all this context of ministry, we have come to realize that there are real struggles among young adults, young professionals who are Christians. There is an observation which is backed by statistics showing, especially in Europe and in the West, a stark decline in the number of people identifying themselves as Christians. And also big proportions in various countries in Europe and in North America of people who identify with no religion among people between 18 and 29 years of age. In the United States, back in 2011, the Barna Group in the USA reported that 59% of Christians who were teenagers active in their church basically stop attending church, stop identifying to their Christian faith. That is a symptom of a struggle which is real and has led to these observations by the man who led these studies in the US. The cultural pressures faced uniquely by millennials make holding on to Christian faith a difficult undertaking. If their faith is shallow, how can it survive? And he proposes a solution. We need new ecosystems of spiritual and vocational apprenticeship that can support deeper relationships and more vibrant faith formation. That leads us to our research. That research is being conducted over the past 3 to 4 years with the support of the Templeton Religion Trust. And we're grateful to a secular organization, actually, to support these efforts over the past few years. It was led among 350 participants who originate in 27 countries. And the research journey implied several steps, entry surveys, reports from the participants about their experiences, groups of conversation, and exit surveys. And there are 3 core research questions which we were looking at. The first one is, what hinders young Christian adults from practicing the virtues associated with their faith in their professional life? What is the blockage? Secondly, how would these Christian virtues, lived out in the public sphere through different professions, how would they change the way participants behave in their workplace? So how would the practical translation of these virtues change the way young Christian professionals behave in their workplaces? And then thirdly, what can we do? What can we do to help a generation of young Christian adults overcome these hindrances, promoting a greater consistency between their private faith and public life as they start their professional lives? And in order to explore these research questions, we will hear from various members from our team. And I'm now giving the floor to Samuel, who will introduce the research exploring the first question. Over to you, Samuel.
Thank you, Christelle. Thank you for the introduction, and good to see everyone online. Thank you for joining us. Now, the days of being a student for some of you may feel like many years ago, of socializing, making friends perhaps for life, lectures starting at 10 or 11 in the morning, a mix of study and play, sleeping in late and having a routine that was highly flexible. But then suddenly when the alarm goes at 10 to 6 on a Monday morning, you know that your inbox is stacking high with emails. You board a packed metro, the Northern Line perhaps in London, and you go to work. The student days are well and truly behind you. Now, according to one researcher, Erik Erikson, a German-American psychologist, he calls this a significant stage of psychosocial development. He has a model which insinuates that there's a number of stages of psychosocial development in the life of any human person, whether in preschool, school age, adolescence, young adulthood, and beyond. The specific transition that we're interested in is the transition from education into work, and he calls this a developmental crisis. Now, this book was written in 1964, but I think we can all agree that it's still highly relevant. In our research, we articulate it this way. Young Christian professionals face an uphill struggle to bridge their faith and their professional lives. Why do so many struggle to keep following Christ? And is harmony between faith and work even possible? Our research into these key virtues in the workplace, supported by Templeton, as Christelle said, identified the primacy of integrity. Integrity is the first and frontmost virtue in the workplace. We call this integrity is number one, but it's so fragile. Integrity is number one, but it's so fragile. We asked participants this question: if you were to select one virtue to guide your behavior in your work life, what would it be? If you were to select one virtue to guide your behavior in your work life, what would it be? And here's the response of what we had back. We had a number of virtues cropping up: humility, kindness, love, honesty, compassion, wisdom, patience, trustworthiness, diligence, different in a way for many different professions. But the standout virtue, it goes without saying, as you can see on screen, was integrity. Integrity is essential, a defining quality of working life. It's one of the most quoted yet least understood qualities of working life. Integrity is the currency of trust. When it fails, corruption can dominate, trust can be eroded, relationships can fail, workplaces can fail, even societies can fail. And a robust sense of integrity can uphold professional standards and duties, giving credibility to the hope and to the witness that believers express in Christ when they're at work in the workplace. In our research, we found a lot of interesting things. We don't have time to present them all this evening. One of them is this idea that integrity is a crossover virtue. So on the left-hand side, you see a question here asked for work. What's the most important virtue for work? And on the right, what's the most important virtue for home? And integrity scores in the top 3 for both of these, alongside honesty and love, interestingly. So integrity is a crossover virtue for both personal life and professional life. Secondly, we identified that integrity acts as an antidote to the cross pressures of a demanding work culture. This means that when work culture plays a seriously indexing role in shaping our views, our attitudes, even our worldview, integrity is an antidote to shape-shifting under that pressure. We used a work evaluation tool as part of Crosscurrent to understand that. And bear in mind, we had 350 participants answering this from 27 different countries, 27 different nations. They represented a number of main employment streams. And you can see here a sense of some of the professions represented, from consultants to PhD students, resident doctors to managers, those working in teaching, research, and beyond. The main 6 streams that we worked with were business and management, government, research, law, medicine, and tech. And in general, participants noted that integrity is critical as an antidote to the pressures of 4 specific cross pressures: the pressures of tight deadlines, workaholism, burnout, and conformism. Conformism to superiors, conformism to the expectation of our bosses, but also our colleagues. Now, integrity is something that we talk about a lot, but we find hard to define. So we noted that it's also an aspirational virtue. It's something that we long for, yet we don't know exactly how to live it out. There's a virtue gap between aspiration and lived reality. So we can say integrity is important, but what's in the box, so to speak? How do we define it? Cultural drivers, work pressures, the expectations of seniors, financial pressures, office politics, all of these can militate against integrity. What we found, though, was that with integrity, there's a clear mandate for work, a sense of purpose or vision. And that can help to articulate the sorts of concrete action steps needed to form the backbone of a practical lived reality of witness in the workplace. So we noted that integrity is a crossover virtue between public life and professional life and personal life. It's also an antidote to some of the cross pressures in the workplace. It travels with us, and it's something which is extremely significant, particularly in fragile or perilous workplaces. But it's also an aspirational virtue, which is not well enough understood. Warren Buffett puts it this way. He says, trust is like the air that we breathe. When it's present, no one really notices. When it's absent, everybody notices. Trust is like the air that we breathe. And we found throughout our research that role models were of critical importance in embodying what that trust looks like in practice, what that integrity looks like in a career. We'll come back to this in a later chapter, but suffice to say that the need for role models stood out far above other aspects in embodying integrity in a career. So I'll hand back to you, Christelle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel. It was a very interesting introduction to the study, and you underlined the importance of integrity as a crossover virtue, which stands out pretty clearly, but is also under pressure and also hard to define. I want to give the floor now to Adi, who is connecting from Romania, and you want to lead us further in this reflection and tell us what the research has shown about what it means to actually practice these values in working life. Over to you, Adi.
Thank you, Crystal. Well, I'll be talking about work as being both career and calling. And I want to start by making a few remarks about the broader cultural context in which young Christian professionals work. When it comes to work, there's been a shift, a cultural shift in Western societies from work to career and from career to calling. This is fairly recent, but we take it for granted. We all tend to expect a lot more from our work compared to how our parents saw work. Earning a living is not enough. Competence is no longer sufficient. You can't simply do your job honestly. You need to be passionate about it. Work should make you happy, give you a sense of meaning and identity. Now, what's interesting about our times is that more people than ever before in history stake their identity on their professional achievements. Work is less about being useful and more about personal satisfaction, at least in the West. This is the water we all swim in. This blurs our sense of identity. Now, as we try to understand what are the main challenges that young Christian professionals face in their workplace, two themes emerged. First is the importance of relationships and colleagues. Relationships are front and center for participants in work and also outside work. Second is the importance of character. Integrating personal belief and public conduct is a priority for young Christian professionals. As my friend and colleague Samuel said, integrity is a crossover virtue, is an important aspirational virtue. Now, these crucial aspects, the importance of relationships and the importance of character, brings us to the biblical concept of neighborliness. Our quantitative analysis shows that only a small proportion of the respondents, that is 36%, said that work is where they find meaning in life. However, a very large proportion of respondents, 76%, agree that they love to be liked by the people they work with. No surprise here, right? Now, this suggests that even if work is not the most significant shaper of life philosophy for participants, the relationships formed at work play a significant role in shaping their sense of identity and place in the world. After all, we must spend most of our active time at work interacting with colleagues. How they see us and how we see them matters a lot. As Christians, we know too well that we are called to love our neighbors as ourselves. But what do we do when our neighbor is our difficult colleague, or our demanding boss, or our competitor, or someone who bothers us and makes our life difficult? Now, participants know that this biblical command is easy to understand, but hard to live by. In order to love our colleagues as ourselves, we need to see them as human beings made in the image of God, regardless of their religious beliefs or life philosophy. And what we noticed is that participants see work as an opportunity to serve and love people. This is encouraging. Instead of bosses, difficult colleagues, customers, or competitors, you start to see neighbors. But there's a glitch here. Acting neighborly requires consistency. And consistency between belief and behavior often requires distinctive living and a high degree of criticality. What we've discovered is that rather than viewing work as a job needed to pay the bills, work is seen as both career and calling for our participants, and they attach to it an inherent sense of meaning. Participants see the importance of relationships and value creativity, service, and community ahead of consumption, careerism, and individualism. Now, this is great, but on the other hand, cross-current participants are very aware of the potential cost associated with such a countercultural calling. To name just a few: marginalization, bullying, or even losing their jobs. Sadly, what we learned from them is that Christian opinions are often dismissed as radical voices, while Christian behavior might be despised or demeaned as weakness or lack of ambition. Especially in result-driven places and workplaces where self-promotion and the pursuit of financial gains are highly valued, not playing along the tune can be perceived either as weakness or even as a threat to the dominant culture. Another very interesting finding is that in places that pride themselves on their tolerance, especially research, academia, big tech, and international organizations, our participants note that all views are welcome as long as these views are not faith-based or taken too seriously. You can bring your whole self to work as long as you leave your deepest held personal convictions at the door. Now, this is interesting because consistency often comes out as distinctiveness. Living out differently will draw attention to you in your workplace. And it won't be always comfortable, because being a good Christian cannot be reduced to merely being a good team player or a nice colleague. Christian witness is not simply a matter of being supportive. It often implies questioning the compromises society at large and people around you are willing to make and paying the price for it. And the price can range from making you unpopular with the people you care about. As I said, everyone wants to be loved by their colleagues and liked by them, to even potentially losing your job. Consistency usually involves costs. Even when we practice Christian virtues, we don't practice them as Christian virtues. We tend to pick and choose what's convenient. What we noticed that cross-current participants develop a richer and more complex understanding of virtues. As they learn more about Christian character, they tend to invest each virtue with more weight and more substance, and they are less likely to claim that they themselves are virtuous. Now, this contributes to a much needed humility and realism. This is what we called in our report the cross-current effect. And I come to the final point of our finding, which in my opinion is maybe the most interesting one, is this one. By the nature of their faith and professions, participants are living in a liminal space. Participants inhabit an in-between space, being part of the Christian minority while also being in a demanding professional career. Let me just unpack a little bit this one for you. A liminal space is a space of complexity and intersection. It's a space at the edges, on the borders of various different domains, which are distinct but often overlap. Such places of intersections have their risks, their specific risks, and their specific opportunities. Now, we all know that both career and faith require 100% commitment. Also family, if you have one. But we're not talking about intellectual commitment or theoretical agreement, but deep existential commitment. Being an outstanding professional and a dedicated Christian are not things that simply happen to someone. They both require intent, commitment, and failure to integrate the two often result in living a disintegrated life, and it can have potentially catastrophic results. We noticed there is a real risk of burnout, and there is a constant temptation for young professionals in competitive professions to evaluate one's own worth based on performance. When the cultural shift I mentioned in the beginning overlaps with the spiritual motivations to see work as a calling, we deal with a very, very powerful mix. Now, Christian professionals strive for excellence and therefore establish credibility in their own field, and they have great potential for influence. It's also potentially dangerous, as I said, because if people don't live with a biblical understanding of self-worth, a secure sense of identity and belonging, and an assurance that they are not loved based on their performance, it can break them. Being at the intersection of faith communities and scientific or professional communities, young professionals are uniquely placed. They're part of both worlds. To be fully immersed in both requires attending properly both to their work and to their calling as Christians.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you. It's beautiful, I think, and striking that what you underline. Excuse me, what you underline. This need for consistency in Christian character in all areas of life, which leads to living differently. And we have people from all regions of the world. I've seen people from Africa, from North America, from various countries in Europe, and I wonder whether you understand and can identify with that experience of feeling that you're torn in between two different spaces, inhabiting this liminal space. And I think it's good at this moment actually to talk together about what it would mean to tackle these difficulties. What can we do actually to work against these hindrances and these struggles? And I will call Rodica, who's calling in from Moldova, to share some feedback about experience through the Cross-Current ministry. Over to you, Rodica.
Thank you, Christelle, and welcome to all who joined us tonight on YouTube and Facebook. I hope what we are sharing is inspiring, encouraging, and motivating you. So I was delegated to share with you our findings about the need for discipleship in the young professional's life. So before ascension, Jesus sent his disciples into the world saying, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of this age." This is what we as Christians, all Christians over the years, call the Great Commission. And the Great Commission is not about saving souls. It is about discipleship. Salvation and sanctification are the work of God's sovereign grace. Our work as his disciples is to disciple others' lives until they are totally yielded to God, says Oswald Chambers. So how can we help a generation of young Christian adults to be Christ's followers in this world, overcoming the challenges and developing great consistency between their private faith and public life as they start their professional lives? Working with young professionals for almost 10 years, Graduate Impact developed a curriculum to better help them integrate their faith and working life, and created surveys, feedback forms to have a better picture of their challenges in professional life. When explicitly asked in the quantitative entry survey what barriers young Christian professionals face in the workplace in living out the character virtues of service, love, integrity, generosity, humility, and beneficial purpose, 5 out of 7 most mentioned are related or directly mentioning discipleship. Among those are lack of mentoring in small groups or long-lasting relationships. Another one is lack of good role models in the professional field. And another one is a shallow discipleship. All these points us that the discipleship is something that our young professionals are extremely interested in and they need it. In our focus group, participants mentioned external challenges in the marketplace versus internal barriers being quite impactful in discipling young Christian adults away from Christ. There are real threats like being marginalized, labeled, and sometimes up to being forced to leave a job. Therefore, there is an internal reaction of fear and anxiety to those possible and often real threats. In some places, corruption was mentioned as a real threat and cause for Christians to leave a job. What is alarming, though, is that participants in focus group admitted their own cynicism and discouragement, because why try to do better if that has no effect? Also mentioned a level of complacency due to the extreme busyness in the job. They don't have time to think through these things. Others mentioned that some even admitted an inability to relate to faith matters in a relevant and non-religious way. They don't know how to talk about God in the workplace without sounding religious. Which of the following virtues is the hardest for you to live out at work was one of the questions that we addressed in the poll in our focus groups. And as you see in this beautiful chart, integrity, humility, and beneficial purpose as virtues are ranked as the most difficult to live out in the workplace, and integrity is following them very close. So there is a great need of sound teaching, of role models, of peer mentoring and accountability to grow in Christ-like character and learn to genuinely live out those virtues in the workplace realities. The results of the surveys, feedback, focus group, and also interacting with participants in cross-current groups led us to the same conclusion, that there is a great need and a deep longing among Christian young professionals for discipleship that will help them to apply sound biblical teaching to their work realities and help them bridge their faith community life, and their working life. There is too much unnecessary and unhelpful stretching in living a divided life between Sunday and Monday. But how to do this when 60% of their active time they are away from church? They want to serve their local church, but often have little time to be involved in church activities. On the other side, they want to share their faith at work and to be salt and light, but they don't have enough or relevant biblical teaching contextualized and applied to their professional and career development realities. So discipleship has to do with a long-term character-shaping, formative influence from one or several people. It should lead to cultivating and demonstrating a number of beneficial virtues in all areas of life, including professional life, that eats up the biggest part of one's active time. I like how John Stott in his book, The Radical Disciples, puts it. We are neither to seek to preserve our holiness by escaping the world, nor to sacrifice our holiness by conforming to the world. Escapism and conformism are thus forbidden to us. Cross-current has helped to identify three key components to growing in Christ-like character and integrate his in the working life. Both peer and role model mentoring that creates space for honest conversation, friendship and fellowship in a community of like-minded and active participants to share with, and developing a biblical worldview in an ongoing training and teaching on the virtues. How do we do this? We do this in meeting, as was mentioned by my colleagues, in meeting in small groups, city-based or professional groups, over a weekend and over 2-3 years of teaching, through contextualized teaching to workplace realities, profession-targeted and committed to industry-specific issues, being consistent to learning how to apply biblical principles by continually integrating their growing understanding of the implications their Christian identity has on life. By the end of every city cross-current meeting, participants commit to a personal agenda of change that keeps them committed to developing certain aspects in their lives that need particular attention or development. Accountability and peer and role model mentoring through prayers, encouragement and monitoring progress in between the meetings. And using role model, goal, reality, options, and what's next in the peer mentoring session. This is what we found and how we try to help young professionals. Christel?
Thank you very much, Rodica. And you talk about a subject which is dear to many Christians, and certainly to me, which is the subject of discipleship. You defined it as long-term character-shaping relationships, and as we follow Christ. And it is interesting that young Christian professionals experience sometimes cynicism and complacency because they sit in an area of pressure. They feel that their professional life is steering them away. Sometimes we are discipled by other voices than Christ, and we lack role models, and and we feel that the discipleship that we're already involved in, it does not go deep enough and is not equipping us enough for our professional life. And I wonder whether that's the feeling or the experience of the people who are listening to us. I know that many of you are young professionals, and it is very important for the Cross-Current ministry to understand these realities and understand how to tackle them best. So I'd like to invite Charlotte next to talk a little more about the practicalities of that, and then we will give the floor to Tim, who will tell us about how to go about it in the future, what is to be expected. Do not hesitate to ask questions if there are questions you have, or share comments. Use your comments, use the chat function on Facebook and YouTube to do that. Over to you, Charlotte.
So if you've been part of Cross-Current in any way, it is highly likely that you've heard this quote from Dr. John Stott. You cannot blame meat for going rotten. That is just what meat does. But you can blame the salt for not being there. All of our research has been aimed at learning more about how to help those of you who are young Christian professionals remain salty while you make that transition from university to working life. So what has the research specifically shown that can help? First, contextualized Bible teaching and case studies. When you enter the professional work world, the teaching from church may seem very distant from what you are experiencing at work. So it is important to have contextualized Bible teaching that shows the impact your work can have for Jesus and the impact Jesus can have on your work. Following the biblical teaching with case studies then provides the opportunity to talk through the application of it in workplace dilemmas and difficulties. Secondly, long-term invested relationships with like-minded Christians are vital. Relationships with people who are also intentionally striving to live for Christ at work, perhaps even in the same professional field, give you a safe place to discuss issues and to support one another when faced with work cultures which discourage distinctive living. When those relationships are long-term, they provide accountability to be consistent in your Christian character. So the research shows that 1, contextualized Bible teaching, and 2, relationships with like-minded Christians equip you to live integrated lives. While thinking through integrated lives, we arrived at this idea of flourishing, influence, impact. We came to realize that integration of faith and work allows for personal flourishing. When people are struggling with who they are in their profession, it is difficult to have a positive Christian influence on their workplace. But when they are flourishing personally, it is possible to have a tremendous influence within their workplace by consistently living out their faith-influenced virtues. This influence, in turn, allows for a real impact to be made in their professional sphere and in all of society. To repeat, being able to live consistent lives of integrity allows you to flourish as an individual, which in turn helps you have a Christian influence in your workplace, which then increases the beneficial impact for Christ you have in your profession and in society.
Beautiful. Thank you, Charlotte, for these words. In a minute, I will give the floor to Tim for some final remarks about where to go from here. Is this a concept which speaks to you, which may speak to some of your friends? We all know that professional life as believers is difficult enough. It is important to work together and to be in relationship with each other. And we'll have a time for discussion to answer some of your questions and comments just after Tim speaks. But do feel free to share some of your thoughts in the comments. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks very much. Hi there, everybody. Really nice to see you. And really nice to have the team working on this together. Thank you, all of you, for your really hard work in helping Cross-Current reach as many people as we're able to reach. And thank you to our friends and allies out there who are also helping us do this. We have this really simple idea. I always like to do this, to lift our eyes to see the big cathedral that we're helping to build. And the whole ethos behind our work is that we want to help this emerging generation of young Christian adults to become more effective ambassadors for Christ in their workplaces, their professions, and their societies. And when you come from the West, you will know that we are a minority. We're a tiny minority within our populations, but we're a minority that is silenced because of our legacy of having once been so dominant within our cultures. I was talking to a friend just earlier this week who's been in his workplace for 20 years and his senior in the workplace, and he's very, very personable and relational and knows everybody very well and is always rushing around to give people a helping hand. And he was called in by his boss and told by his boss that from now on he is not allowed under any circumstances to express an opinion that is derived from his faith. He's a silenced Christian living in the United Kingdom. Silenced because his opinions are too controversial and people don't like them. And he said to me, the only way around this is that my actions will have to speak louder than my words. I'll have to live the life in a way that anticipates people looking and then asking me about my belief, and that I can't be silent. And that's very, very biblical idea, isn't it? It's what Peter talks about in his first letter. Live such good lives among non-believers that they see your good works and glorify God. And always be ready to give a reason for the hope you have, but do so with gentleness and with a reverent fear of God as you do so. And I think that's what we're about with Crosscurrent. We want to help you. We want to help your generation to be what our generation has not been. An effective, dynamic witness to the brilliance and beauty of the gospel, to the lordship of Jesus Christ that permeates into every area of society, in your workplaces, through your professions, into your societies. Radical followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, living as ambassadors of his grace. And integrity, which we talk about all the way through this presentation. Integrity, we equate it with the biblical idea of righteousness. This isn't self-righteousness, which is a loathsome thing. This is righteousness, which is part of the nature of God and which is reflected in us as image bearers of God's identity. Righteousness quite literally means doing that which is best for every other individual in every single circumstance. And it talks about our relationship upwards to the Lord God Almighty. We are righteous when we worship him, but it also talks about our relationships towards others and our responsibility for creation. And integrity, which is like this, will allow us to exercise reasonable, moderate, compassionate Christianity in the public square. And honestly, believe me when I say this, our world cannot afford to live without that. The alternatives to the beauty of God's story for his creation are all disasters. So we want to help you. We want to help you to help other people. That's our vision. We can't do all this on our own, but we long to see more and more and more young Christian adults helped to find a way to connect faith and work, to live lives of integrity, to practice what it means to be image bearers, imago Dei, in their working life, to know what it means to be integral witnesses to Jesus Christ, who live for Jesus and who speak for Jesus, and to understand how to impact the world. So that as the world, as John Stott indicated in the quote we looked at just now, as the world gets increasingly rotten, so that we, by the Lord's grace, might be effective salt and light in that rotten world for his glory and for the sake of humanity. It's a big vision, isn't it? And like all big visions, it equates to small steps. So we started our first Crosscurrent group with just 12 people, meeting together twice a year for 3 years. And we've ended up producing a curriculum, a fantastic set of resources that you can use. And these resources, we've got a couple of workbooks. We've got a curriculum of modules that you can work through. Some of you have obviously done this, I know. Some of you are waiting to do it. We would love to help you to have these resources in your hands and to learn how to gather a group of people around you in your church or in your IFES group, a group of people who can have a go together at learning what it means to integrate faith and work, to integrate all of life, to bring everything under the lordship of Jesus Christ. So our plan is over the coming years to help support the natural organic growth of Crosscurrent in response to you. When you come to us and say, we want to have a go at this, we'll say, fantastic. How can we help? We want to facilitate the provision of professional groups. So we have a plan to try and nurture leaders for different professional groups in different nations, using some of the fantastic older believers who've been working with us for the last decade. We want to continue creating high quality resources, not just the workbook. We've got a great website. We want your articles in that website because you are a Christian in a specific context, facing specific pressures, working out what integrity looks like, what it looks like to be an ambassador for Christ where you are. Oh, but somebody else could learn from you. Write an article. I don't care if it's in Spanish or Portuguese or Romanian or Moldovan. I don't care. Write an article, because somebody else might learn from it, might benefit from it. We want to form a community of believers traveling in the same direction, supporting each other, caring for each other, loving each other, reaching out to each other, globally connected. The body of Christ, a collection of living stones being built into a spiritual house. Christ at the foundation, Christ at the cornerstone, and by his grace, us in the middle. So, thank you, team, for a great contribution this evening, a fantastic presentation. Thank you, participants, for your research, for all the stuff you've been able to feed into us. Please, stay involved. Help us to know how we can help you. And together, we can do something brilliant for the glory of God. Thank you. Christelle, monsieur.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tim, for these encouraging words and for underlining the fact that we all have a part to play in this. That there are many ways we can contribute and encourage others, and that this is ultimately a learning community. You know, as Rodica underlined, discipleship is about long-term character shaping, which is in the context of relationships. We have a few minutes now available for a conversation, which will include the people who are watching this, and unfortunately not the people who are going to watch later. That's a privilege of the people following live. And we will bring to the conversation some of the comments and questions which I have seen. I would like, however, to start, Adi, if I could ask you briefly, because I see some resonance in the comments on the social media about it. You mentioned the fact that following Christ in the professional context can be costly. And I know that you were part of focus groups where you had like real life testimonies of people in various professional contexts. Can you just say a few words so that we realize what several have been telling you?
Well, we tend to underestimate if we don't look around properly how countercultural Christianity really is. And I'm not speaking about cultural label as I'm a Christian because I'm not a Buddhist, or I'm not a Muslim because I'm born in Europe, I'm a Christian. Now, when people actually see Christianity for what it is and try to live by it, then they get some attention. And it puts them not in a very comfortable spot always. So especially, this was really interesting, especially in places that pride themselves to be tolerant. all views are welcome, but not if you're serious about your own beliefs, then keep it for yourself. And also there's a cost to pay where there's corruption that goes without saying. Like everybody does something, and if you notice and you try to live differently, not out of a sense of self-righteousness, just because out of keeping a clear conscience, then people would first try to marginalize you, or they will judge you for judging them. They suppose that you think you're better, and that's not comfortable. So we had participants who had to leave work because that they couldn't change the culture of the workplace, and they couldn't have a clear conscience being there in a very gray area. So yes, there are costs. It's all kinds of costs, but I think it is definitely worth living with integrity, because integrity pays in the very, very long run. It might not pay in the immediate circumstances, but yeah, this is what we're called to do, and it's not always easy. You won't get popular for going against the grain. Sometimes it involves going against the grain, and it's very difficult. I've experienced this myself, and it's been confirmed by many people who worked in academia or research. Like the moment you say you're a Christian and you're serious about it, you see the jaws dropping. Like, oh, I thought you were smarter than that. It's like it's something you feel that people. There's a lot of prejudice to overcome.
Yes.
Like people tend to rate.
So the key word is prejudice. I hear.
And
yes.
And
I see a comment from Nepal here, and I think it's interesting because it expands the conversation to realities outside of the Western world. And I guess one thing we're learning is that we're more or less on the same boat, if not in terms of gravity of situation. We all live in these areas of tension. And let me try to pronounce the name right. Pratigya from Nepal is sharing the kind of tension, the reality of tension between the Christian world and the outside world for her. She says in Nepal, it's very hard for us as Christians to connect to other people. First, because of church culture, which asks people to stay away from people from the outside, not to get influenced, but also by fear of being defamed for our faith. So is the solution to, and I'm going to ask this question to Tim. Adi told us about this kind of tension and how it translates within the focus groups we've worked with in the context of the research. And is the solution then to create another world, or invest our energy and time into the Christian world and learn how to be a Christian, but within a more Christian context? What would you say about it? And I think you need to unmute your microphone first.
Thank you very much, brother. Yeah. It makes me think of something I was reading recently in a book. It's a great book for you to grab if you want to. A Theology of the Laity by a Dutch theologian called Hendrik Kramer, written in 1958. And he makes this point that the church does not exist for the benefit of the church. The church exists for the benefit of the world. Peter, 2,000 years ago, put it this way. He said that we are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, in order that we might declare the praises of him who called us out of darkness into his wonderful light. And this isn't a declaration that goes on in a silent space. It's not a declaration that involves scents and candles. It's a declaration in public, a proclamation in public of the glory of the one who called us out of darkness into his wonderful light. And that is the calling of the church, every single part of the church. And we are part of the church. And we are naturally engaged in the world every time we go to work, every time we sit in a taxi or a tuk-tuk, every time we cross the road and avoid death, we're engaging with the world. That's just a natural part of being a Christian living in the world. So we're there already. That's my point number one. We are there already. Number two, it's a dangerous place to be. Because we see many Christians get dominated by the work culture. And I think that's what you're referring to here, sister, that you can be overwhelmed by the influence of other cultures. And I think that it's really essential that we build a really strong connection between our identity in Christ, in the body, that is in our congregation, and also our identity in Christ in the world. So that although we travel to work without our pastor, we somehow have to force an overlap of these worlds. And that means we ask people in our church congregation to pray with us for the circumstances we face at work, to pray with us for the people that we meet at work. But it also means the other way, that we have an openness when we're in work of perhaps being able to talk about our church. Now, that might be very controversial and impossible in some cultures. But where it's possible and where it's not going to cause us enormous trouble, we should be doing that, bridging the gap, as we said earlier in the presentation, and learning somehow to bring the church with us into work, to connect these two things. Jesus said that no one can serve two masters. You can't serve God and mammon. And the reason he says that is because one master will always have a bigger stick. And if we, as Christians, allow ourselves to be divided into workplace Christians and church place Christians, work will always try to dominate. Will always try to force Jesus into the margins. So he becomes a lifestyle choice, which ultimately the devil wants to just push out of the way in our lives. So I would say, work hard. Please work hard. And, talking to us about it if these answers are inadequate. Apologies to Pabi in Belgium, because every time I type your name, it comes up as baby.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And I think I wanted to finish this time together. All of us within the Cross Current team, as several of the people listening, I'm sure, have been involved in thinking and doing, practical things to sort of bridge the gap between the world of work and the world of faith. And I'd like to ask everyone to maybe share a practical thought about something that, once this webcast is over, or once we have finished the Zoom lounge time together, which will follow, something practical that people can put in place, maybe someone to talk to, or an action to put in place, or someone to write to. Yes, what further steps, practical steps, can we take towards overcoming this uphill struggle to reconcile faith and work? And I'd like to start with Rodica. If there's maybe one thing from your experience that you would like to share with our listeners.
Thank you, Christelle. I was thinking when you started to invite us, and the first thing that came to my mind was the word accountability. Don't be afraid to have a peer, a like-minded Christian who is in the marketplace, and be accountable to. Peer mentoring and peer accountability is crucial, along with learning the fundamental teaching of the Bible, and also stay in touch with your Christian fellows in the church. Ask somebody to be your prayer partner, and make yourself vulnerable. Don't be ashamed and feel guilty if something is not working out as you would like to. Just be open, be accountable to someone, and ask openly someone in the church to pray for you. As practical as this.
Thank you. That's very, very simple and very practical. Samuel, what would you like to share?
Sure, thank you. I guess in terms of the real practicalities, a friend of mine at Regent College in Vancouver, and I see a few people from Regent joining us this morning, Canada time. So thank you very much for joining us. Said something that I found really interesting about the weave of a carpet. You have this weave which takes shape in our minds and our lives as well in terms of worldview. And the weave they called the fabric of faithfulness. The fabric of faithfulness comprised of mentors, worldview, and friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the kind of practical step that I would put out there would be for you, reflect on that. Which part of the weave do you most desperately need to kind of build up, bulk up? Which part of the weave is getting a bit frayed? Is it mentors? Is it role models, as we said before? Is it friendship? Is it just people to talk to? Community relationship? Accountability, as Roika mentioned before as well? Or is it just worldview? Just surely not enough time to be able to read the sorts of literature, read the sorts of books, read the sorts of articles that can help me to bridge my faith and my work, help me to reconcile some of those discordances between the two, and help me to have a thoroughly Christian worldview, whether I'm working as a consultant, a lawyer, a doctor, a surveyor, a teacher, or a social entrepreneur.
Thank you very much, Samuel. That's a list of very helpful things. Charlotte, could I ask what you would like to share?
Sure. I would just encourage you to take a look at the Crosscurrent website. We have a whole bunch of articles there, both about biblical worldview and things like that, but also specific articles written from people who are in professional fields and their experiences of being a Christian and how that impacts it. I just find that to be very encouraging for me. And so if you're new to this whole thought process, it could be a great place to start thinking about this.
Brilliant. Yes, so that's www.cross-current.org. Lots of resources there, and lots which keep getting added. You can also follow us on social media, and I believe that you know some of the accounts if you're there. All right. The next person I'd like to ask is Adi. What would you like to share?
Well, very much in line with what Samuel said. You need with this fabric of faithfulness, you can put it in other ways. You need character, you need convictions, and you need the community. I've just named the 3 C's because they're easy to understand and to remember. But don't be afraid to test your convictions. And more than anything, don't allow yourself to be carrier of an ideological Christianity. Don't just recite or repeat things. Like if they're not true to yourself, and if they're true, they work, and they work in the real world, and they work where there's no way. Christianity is not a religion. So don't be afraid to test it out, and make sure you have the 3 things. You have your convictions right, you examine them and test them and discuss with people who think otherwise. Don't be afraid of that, but make sure you're of character. You don't just do the talk and don't walk the walk, because then you will ruin. You'll simply scare people away. They might get a false idea of Christianity. Now, you don't have to be perfect. You can say you don't know. You can say you struggle, but be real and find a community. In terms of the other things which Charlotte also said, explore your own professional field and make sure you are competent. You understand the world you live in. Yeah, that would be it. I mean, there are many things. we could say. But
thank you, Eddie. Tim, would you like to share maybe a final thought before we wrap up?
Thanks, brother. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry to drop out before my internet just went bust completely, but it's lovely to be here. My final thought is we want to help you, but we, again, would love you to think about how you can help others. We've got resources. We can train you. We can stand beside you. But what about you having a go in your church congregation or with a group of graduates from your IFES movement? What about you having a go at starting a cross-current group? When I started the first one, the potential for failure was enormous. When you start your first one, the potential for failure is less. It's pretty good. Why not have a go? Because we would love to work with you, to support you, to help some people in your context. So that would be my closing thought. Just to say, if there are problems that you face being a Christian in the workplace, then 90% of the people in your congregation are facing similar problems. But they just don't have anybody to talk to. So what about taking that first step? Pray, and then speak to your minister and say, could we do this? Don't make it something big. Make it something little. Maybe do it informally. Just get a few friends around, and we can send you the resources and stuff, and we can chat to you on the Zoom, and we can help you and coach you to do it. We would love to do that. We'd love to see little fires spreading across Europe, across Eurasia, across Latin America, across East Asia, across North America, across Africa, across South Asia. We'd love to see little fires all over the place of Christians learning to bring their faith with them into their workplace. Because the workplace it's full of people who never go to church. It's full of people who never have an opportunity to hear the good news about Jesus Christ or to see a Christian in action until the Lord puts you there with them. And then they've got a chance. Yeah, so please help us. Get involved. That's all I would say. Thanks, Christelle.
Thank you, Tim. So you can get involved and help start a fire. And our prayer as a team is that more and more people will feel encouraged and equipped and see the reality that it is possible to find reconciliation, harmony, and to thrive as Christian professionals. In the comments on YouTube and on Facebook, you have seen the links to our report, which you can read in full. We have several summaries of it in several formats. Please take it, share it to people around you, and keep connecting regularly to our website, www.cross-current.org, as well as our social media platforms on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. We are present and we share content which does not only emanate from the Cross-Current team, but from the entire 600 people plus strong community of young professionals and alumni from Cross-Current programs who share some of their thoughts, reflections on economics, politics, leadership, management, law, public affairs, medicine, you name it, theology, discipleship. There are many, many themes which we can explore together and resources that we simply invite you to use. So let's spread this fire together. And if you would like to continue the conversation, you are more than welcome in the Zoom lounge room, which will be open as soon as this webcast is over. The link is in the comments posted by the Cross-Current administrators. Can I just ask the administrators to post these links again so that everyone can see them? And the last thing which is left for me to say is thank you to everyone for having followed this webcast. We welcome your prayers and any form of support which you believe you can bring to this ministry, if only by spreading the word in order to spread the fire. Thank you very much. May God bless you.
Okay, are we on?